Chapter 1.
Eric Wesley twisted in his bunk. The damn spring was prodding his back again. It was sticking out right at the center of the mattress, forcing him to alternate sleeping at an odd angle or curving his body to avoid the annoying prick. Neither was suitable for a man who preferred sleeping on his back. $7 million to repurpose this damn boat, and they couldn't even install decent bunks. Eric rolled to his left side and stared out into his tiny dark cabin. Silver moonlight streaked through the window, reflecting the vast ocean outside. He could hear the waves splashing against the hull. Any marine biologist never got tired of such a sound. However, for some, being at sea took a little getting used to, despite their love for the ocean. Eric was one of those, and he felt pathetic because of it, especially since this was only a 30-hour voyage from Massachusetts to Florida. Comparatively speaking, he was barely at sea. But then again, what did he expect? He stared at his master's diploma, shuddering on his little countertop table with the ship's vibrations. Written in black bold italics were the words University of Ohio. Aside from a handful of personally funded trips to the coast, he had barely seen the ocean until a couple of months ago. Luckily, Gundrum Industries wasn't concerned with his seafaring skills. They just wanted someone knowledgeable with the behaviors of sea life, and who could handle the role of a caretaker for various organisms. It wasn't the grandest of career choices for someone of his background, but the pay matched that of the highest institutions for researchers with multiple years of experience. Plus, he needed to pay for his doctorate somehow. Student loan debt had piled up to the point of being overwhelming. He found himself envying people who found decent careers with only 2-year degrees and 10% of the debt. Of course, he didn't expect the magnitude of what he'd be responsible for. And, as if reminding him of its presence, it struck the bulkhead, sending a vibration up into his cabin. It wasn't unusual. The specimen often swam in circles in a relatively enclosed space. The supervisor, Dr. Gina Hudson, had anticipated this, and warned his employer of the risk of shipping it to the facility in Florida. Despite her warnings, Dr. Gundrum ordered Project 9 to be loaded onto the Truth Seeker and ordered it delivered to Gundrum Industries. Why he needed it there so badly, Eric didn't know. But Gundrum was nice enough to add a $5,000 bonus to his paycheck for going along and caring for the specimen during the 1,000-mile trip. Wide awake now, he checked his watch. 4:13 a.m. Roughly 90 miles to go by now. Maybe less, he said to himself. He straightened out on his back and felt the sting of that freaking spring. Son of a... Eric nearly leapt out of his bunk. This time it got him good. He reached under his white shirt and felt a tiny hole in his skin. He retracted his hand and looked at the blood on his fingertips. Great. Might have to put in for a tetanus shot, he muttered. Well, if this is the worst of my troubles, I guess I can't really complain. $5,000 in a day on top of a $90,000 salary? I suppose I can handle a little prick. He smiled at the thought. Many of his classmates were struggling to find work that paid more than breadcrumbs. Even for people with doctorates, it was growing more difficult to find steady placement in this field. And here he was, just shy of making 5 figures. Life could be worse, right? A tremendous boom rocked the ship to port. The room suddenly shifted, the floor now a 45-degree incline. Eric fell against the bulkhead, absorbing the blow with his shoulder. The ship shifted back, throwing him back into the center of the room. Eric regained his balance, his mind racing. The hell just... Another impact rocked the ship again. Again the room rotated, throwing Eric against the wall. Alarms were going off now. He could hear running feet moving down the passageways. Men were yelling, some in a panic, others barking instructions. He only made out a few words. "The cargo hold!" Eric caught his breath. The impacts had come from inside the ship. Only one thing was powerful enough to rock a 500-foot ship like that. He quickly threw on a pair of pants, then ran for the door. He stopped back into the passageway, only to nearly be run down by a group of crew members. He saw another sailor following them. In his hand was a .243 Winchester bolt-action rifle. As the Truth Seeker wasn't an international merchant ship, it was able to get away with having firearms on board. Of course, it wasn't Gundrum that demanded a small armory on board, rather it was the captain. Traveling this close to the mainland, it wasn't pirates he was worried about. "Hey, He grabbed the crew member by the shoulders, stopping him. What the hell's going on? It's your fish, Doc. It's going nuts. They were always calling him Doc, which he always felt the need to correct them on. But this wasn't the time. Where's the captain? He said. On the bridge. He's ordering us to kill it. With that? Eric pointed at the gun. Good luck with that, sailor. Besides, the guy paying for this trip won't have it. He can kiss my ass, Doc, the crew member said. A third impact rolled the ship again. Both men struck the bulkhead and stumbled back as the ship righted itself. The crew member, wide-eyed, shook his head. I'm not getting killed for your playing with nature. He turned on his heel and started running down the corridor. Damn it, Eric muttered, then ran after him. Deafening alarms continued ringing throughout the ship, making it harder to think. With all the chaos, Eric had practically lost all sense of direction. He simply followed the crew member with the rifle down the series of passageways, eventually finding a stairwell. He followed the crew member down the steps, while a couple of other sailors followed closely behind him. One held a .38 caliber revolver, the other a rifle similar to the other. Gunfire echoed from within the ship. Surprisingly, their sounds were nearly drowned out by tremendous watery waves, followed by sounds of men screaming. Eric's heart leapt into his throat as a large crashing sound swept through the vessel. It wasn't an impact like before. This one sounded like a collapsing bridge. He reached the bottom of the stairwell and followed the crew member out the door. They had stepped onto a catwalk overlooking the cargo hold. 30 feet below was a giant pool of water, nearly 300 feet in length and half that in width. It swirled as though caught in a huge vortex. Debris clanged against the bulkheads as they whipped around in a wide circle. It was then that Eric's eyes registered that a portion of the starboard catwalk was missing. He stared across the pool as several meters of metal passageway sloped downward, the end of which was frayed where a connection section had broken off into the pool. Then he remembered the gunfire he heard, and that there were no crew members present firing rifles, except for the men he came with. They spread out along the long metal footbridge, gazing in horror at the swirling debris below. Eric searched the raging water with his eyes. Then he saw it. Between two large metal fragments was a 7-foot fin slicing the water. Under that fin was a torpedo-shaped mass, weighing 80 tons, going around and around at frightening speed. Megalodon. Eric didn't know what was happening. Was it acting out of hunger? He had fed it before retiring to his cabin. Then again, the creature proved to be hungry almost constantly. Dr. Hudson had warned about its high metabolism and how violent it had proven to be when requiring sustenance. Or perhaps it just craved freedom. Many times in its aquarium in the Massachusetts facility did it strike the walls as though intent on freeing itself. It probably sensed the ocean outside. A monster as powerful as the Megalodon was never meant to be contained. It was meant to thrive in the open water, a king of its domain. Or maybe, Eric looked at the broken catwalk, lacking the numerous souls it previously contained. It just wanted to kill. It turned the arc at the forward side, then traveled a short distance to stern under what remained of the starboard catwalk. Suddenly, it turned to its left, and with a flick of its enormous caudal fin, it crashed hard into the bulkhead directly under Eric. The impact shook the vessel, a vessel many times the creature's size and weight. The crew members fell to their knees, doing whatever they could to shift themselves away from the guardrail. Eric, on the other hand, grabbed the bar and leaned out as far as he could. The shark turned away, a large wave taking its place. It splashed high, soaking the caretaker. Ignoring the sting in his eyes, he looked at the large bulkhead underneath him. It was heavily dented outward. Several creases lined the steel. He looked around. There were no other points of impact that he could see. The Megalodon was striking the same exact spot. It was trying to free itself. Jesus, he said. More crew members arrived from other stairwells and took positions on the stern and forward stairwell. Some had rifles in hand, while others were there simply to observe. Before Eric could protest, his ears were struck by loud cracks. Bullets made tiny but violent splashes in the water. Some of them struck the shark's thick skin, which, unbeknownst to the crew members, were tougher than Kevlar. The loud gunfire and repeated stings of the projectiles spurred the Megalodon's violent frenzy further. The beast swiped its huge caudal fin. In that same moment, it crashed into the forward bulkhead. The ship pitched as though a bomb had detonated underneath. The sailors overheard falling about. Eric watched in horror as many of them were flung over the railing. Their screams vanished in an instant, drowned out by the watery waves. Rolling waters threw them about. One let out a cry as the current hurled him right into a section of catwalk. His head collided with its edge, cleaving his skull inward. The water turned bright red all around him. The Megalodon whipped around, immediately picking up the alluring scent. In the span of a heartbeat, it closed the distance and brought its jaws down on the dead crew member. Teeth minced his upper torso, severing everything under the shoulders. Other crew members shouted in horror, witnessing their companion's head and shoulders free fall from the jaws and then scoop up a moment later. Other crew members swam for their lives. The Megalodon felt their rapid heartbeats and struggling motions through its lateral line. Its gray snout broke the surface. Its jaw opened 9 feet, lined with rows of 7-inch serrated teeth. One of the sailors disappeared into its gullet, though his screams continued as he entered its immense stomach. The shark jerked its head to the right, snatching another crew member. The teeth came down on his abdomen and lower back simultaneously. Like garden scissors to a weed stem, they sliced the man in half, flinging his upper body several feet ahead, trailing intestines. The Megalodon snatched the remains and swallowed, then angled itself to the left. It swung its tail and slammed into the bulkhead. Eric fell forward, barely keeping himself from falling over the guardrail. As he caught himself, his eyes found the cavity in the bulkhead. Some of the creases had split, revealing the ocean outside. It was breaking through. Even he had underestimated the Meg's strength. The damn thing was smashing through a 20-millimeter hull. Those rifles and handguns had no chance of stopping it, nor did he have any needles thick enough to penetrate its skin to inject tranquilizer. Escape was inevitable at this point. Project 9 would be out in the open sea, free to kill at his leisure. And if he learned anything from the last few minutes, it was that this beast was more destructive than even his research of the species had indicated. Fishing boats, yachts, even some of the smaller merchant ships would be in grave danger. Oceanic researchers tracking hammerheads and orcapods could possibly find themselves in its path. The only thing Eric Wesley could do at this point was track its movements. Luckily, there was a tag in the shark's dorsal fin, which would allow them to track its movements and recapture it. The shark breached as it snatched another sailor. Eric's stomach churned. It wasn't the horrible carnage that disturbed him this time. He saw the Megalodon's fin. Tag's bright orange color should have been easy to spot. But no. There was only dark gray, tentacle-covered skin. The shark must have scraped the tag off during its rampage. No, no, he muttered. The shark struck again. The breaches widened. Streams of ocean water poured into the cargo hold. Eric held firm to the guardrail as the ship shuddered, then made a mad dash for the stairwell. "Where are you going?" one of the crew members shouted, as if Eric's presence had any influence on the shark's actions. He ignored the idiot and ascended up the stairwell. Now alarms were going off everywhere. Men were running back and forth through the passageways. In the confusion, he had lost sense of direction. He grabbed a sailor running by. "Hey, take me to the armory." "I can't. We're taking on water. Captain's ordered us to abandon ship," the sailor said. Eric slapped him across the face, then pulled him close. The man looked him in the eye, his face red with shock. "The captain made me store my harpoon rifle in the armory," Eric said. "I need to get a tracking device on that shark. If I don't, we won't be able to track it. Thus, we won't be able to stop it from killing anyone it comes across. Now take me to the goddamn armory." The sailor stammered. For a moment it looked as though he would simply continue on his way to the main deck. "This way," he said. They ran sternward, winding through a series of connecting passageways. Something rocked deep below, sounding like a distant boom of thunder. There was another sound of crashing metal and screaming men. Finally, they arrived at the armory. Its door has been left wide open. It wasn't any larger than his cabin. In fact, it was a cabin, refitted for storing a few rifles. He went to the cabinet in the rear and opened it. His harpoon case fell out, striking his forehead with one of its corners. Muttering various curse words, Eric steadied himself and opened the case, revealing the harpoon gun. He assembled the stock and receiver, then grabbed one of the 12-inch harpoons. "Shit! Tracker's in my quarters," he said aloud. There was nobody there to hear. The crew member had already departed. It didn't matter. He could find his way from there. Weapon in hand, he dashed out of the armory and ran to port, finding the passageway where his quarters was located. He yanked the door and immediately saw that his belongings were scattered on the deck. Among them was a black suitcase containing an additional tracker that now more than ever he was so happy he didn't neglect bringing along. He opened the case and found the orange tag. He attached it to the harpoon and loaded it into the gun. The ship rocked again. Crashing metal echoed through the ship, followed by a tidal wave of water. The boat shifted hard to port, throwing all hands against bulkheads and deck railings. Eric found himself near his window, having broken the fall with his arms. A scream caused him to look out. In that same moment, the stream of moonlight flashed as something fell off the deck. Eric looked down. In the thrashing water were at least 6 men swimming for dear life. Directly below, he could see something sticking out of the ship. It was a flap of hull, bent outward like a flower petal. Eric darted into the passageway, initially going for the stairwell leading to the cargo hold. He stopped and turned around, realizing he wouldn't get there in time. He ran sternward until finding a small stairwell leading to the main deck. As he went, he could hear water splashing about. The interior had been breached, allowing water to surge through the bulkheads. The lower decks were flooding rapidly. With the boat listing to port, he found himself nearly walking on the edge of the stairs until reaching the platform at the bend, which was now a 40-degree ramp. With the second flight of stairs nearly going directly upward because of the shift, he had to climb them like a ladder until reaching the top. He emerged on the main deck, which now resembled a humongous ramp. Equipment and crew slid to the portside guardrails. Men were struggling to unload lifeboats. Some of the cranes swung uncontrollably, causing a couple of boats to crash down into the water, with over a dozen crew in each one. Spotlights beamed their white rays into the water, bringing the chaos below into full view. Eric was near the bridge castle, located near the stern of the boat. He ran ahead until he was halfway across the midship body, then peered over the guardrail to the waters below. He could hear large thumping movements below. The Megalodon had not escaped yet, to his relief. That relief was short-lived when he remembered he had one shot at getting the tracker on it, and attaching it to the shark was not as easy of a task as one might think. The only place the harpoon could possibly penetrate would be near one of the fins, likely the dorsal fin. Despite its 7-foot length, it would be difficult to hit, considering it would be atop a creature capable of swimming 30 knots in the dark of night. He leaned down on the guardrail and shouldered the harpoon gun. He took a breath and ignored the hundreds of distractions all around him. There was splashing all around, men struggling to stay afloat. Many with life jackets swam to those without them, forming rings of people clinging to each other. He had to drown out their predicaments in favor of this one mission. He had to. The ramifications of failure were too great. Metal crashed beneath him. Then, it was as though the whole side of the ship exploded outward. Fragments of hull bounced over the sea like skipping stones before plunging into the depths. Now in the place where the fragments had been was the head of the enormous Megalodon. The breach, though immense, was only barely enough for the creature's huge bulk. It wiggled back and forth, swinging its tail inside the ship, trying desperately to push itself out into the open ocean. Inch by inch, foot by foot, it made its way out, jaws snapping wildly as though cursing at its captors. Unknowingly, it created the ideal scenario for Eric to place the tracking device, if he could only see the damn thing clearly. Spotlights panned all over the place. They seemed to be putting the entire ocean in view, except for the one damned spot he needed. "Get a light on the bastard!" he yelled. Nobody seemed to hear him. "Get a light on the shark! Do it now! Now!" He repeated himself a dozen times until one of those white beams panned to stern and down. He could see the Leviathan clearly now. There were tiny marks in its body resulting from scraping against the hull. Nothing significant that would slow it down. Its left pectoral was free, though the dorsal and right pectoral were still stuck in the opening. The shark turned, bringing its fin out of the water. Perfect. Eric adjusted his aim and squeezed the trigger. The harpoon zipped away, hardly making a sound. The barb was so small and insignificant the shark never felt it pierce its skin. The light reflected the tiny orange tag. "Yes!" Eric exclaimed. With the task completed, he tossed the useless harpoon gun away and started looking for a means of staying afloat. The shark shifted again, finally unwedging itself. An 80-ton missile composed of muscle, cartilage, and blood, and shot into the water. It swam out for several hundred yards, then slowed, allowing its body to cruise at restful pace. It swam in a circle, a habit formed in its years in captivity, gradually branching out with each pass. Now it had a new mission: to replenish the energy spent during its assault on the bulkhead. The canals making up its lateral line picked up the frantic motions of small prey struggling along the surface. The Megalodon turned toward the signal and ascended. From the crew member's point of view, a barrel-shaped segment of ocean appeared to rise. Its fin was the first to break the water's surface, then its tail and snout. Men screamed as the beast closed in, its jaw hyperextended, its inner mouth a tunnel blacker than the night air. It passed through the center of the ring of men, engulfing 3 of them in a single bite. It closed the jaws, swallowing them whole. It sensed a large object in its path. The shark turned, sideswiping the ship's hull. Though not dead on, the impact was still tremendous, causing the tilting ship to swing to starboard with enough force to hurl Eric and many others over the guardrail. He opened his mouth to gasp, but shut it immediately upon hitting the water. A swirling current tossed the young biologist around, spinning him head over heels like a wheel. He opened his eyes and saw darkness. For a moment he wondered if he was already dead. Finally that gasp escaped his throat. Through the sting of seawater, he watched a dozen air bubbles travel to his left. He paddled his arms and legs, following the bubbles up to the surface. He emerged with a tremendous splash. After taking in a mouthful of air, he looked around for the shark. For a moment he couldn't see anything but splashing waves. The only thing he saw was a piece of floating debris roughly 10 feet ahead. He paddled to it, quickly closing the distance. He threw his arms around it, feeling its rubbery texture. Its red color stood out. He was floating on a segment from one of the lifeboats. There were no screams around him. He looked around, but could not see any crew members. Nothing. The only sounds came from the ship and the sailors fortunate enough to stay on board. It was behind him. He turned around and was shocked to see that he had drifted over 100 feet away. The stern was dipping below the surface, the tip of the bow yawning several meters high. The spotlights along the superstructure and along the deck continued waving back and forth. Eric noticed one of the white beams traveling across the water. Following the light, he found where it met the ocean, and the enormous dorsal fin the crew member was tracing. The Megalodon was maybe 400 or 500 feet out, finally moving away from the boat. Eric sucked in a deep breath and held still. If he tried swimming frantically, he'd just attract its attention. He inhaled slowly, then exhaled, successfully slowing his heart rate. He watched the fin cutting across the water, lit by the spotlight. The plan seemed to work. The shark was going right by him, totally unaware of his existence. At least that's what he thought. A few more seconds passed, and suddenly the fin rotated to the left, stopping after it was perfectly aligned with him. Eric fought the urge to paddle and kick. It was probably just a coincidence. The thing was in the open sea for the first time, and probably just exploring. He took in another deep breath and waited. The fin continued closing in. The hell? His mind raced. To the shark, he should have been nothing more than a block of wood floating in the water. He knew how sharks use their senses to detect prey. He wasn't making any sounds, especially no low-frequency sounds to attract it. He was not causing any water displacement for it to hone in on. His dark clothes wouldn't attract its eyesight. If anything, it should have been attracted to the lights emitted from the spotlights. And he was too far away for its ampullae of Lorenzini to detect any electrical fields he was emitting. All that left was the sense of smell, which mainly picked up the scent of blood. Eric's brain registered a small sting in his back, the same stinging sensation of rubbing salt on a wound. The prick in his back. That damned mattress spring. The shark's caudal fin sprayed water, driving it close. Finally, Eric gave in to panic. He screamed and paddled as fast as he could. His actions only worked in the shark's favor. It pinpointed his position and accelerated, jaws wide open. The moonlight was overtaken by a huge shadow. Eric felt a brief and devastating impact along his spine. Serrated teeth stabbed deep, impaling his lungs and stomach. The lower jaw closed, the teeth ripping his stomach wide open. Half out of the shark's mouth, he was carried for several yards until it bit again, sucking his entire body into his throat. Eric saw darkness again. This time it wasn't night. The Megalodon explored further. Its digestive system went to work breaking down its prey. It wouldn't last it for long. It needed more. The Megalodon swam in a wide circle, unsure if it wanted to inspect the sinking giant that previously imprisoned it. Its lateral line picked up new signals. Its inner ears detected low-frequency sounds, which instantly attracted its interest. There were new distortions. Whatever was coming, it was big. Curious and hungry for more prey, the Megalodon swam northwest to inspect the phenomenon.